So at the end of the 7 helpers, the last one was wild oat. And it's rather like at the end is also the beginning. So he describes this as the direction finder. And he does a very nice drawing of wild oat in the centre of a compass, as if it's the focal point which will lead somebody back to themselves. His description at one time says, "Wild oat is a remedy that may be needed by anyone, and in cases which do not respond to other herbs, when it seems difficult to decide which to give, try this for at least a week. If the patient does well, continue with it so long as they improve before changing to another remedy." Well, wild oat would have made up the 19th essence. And there is a sense that this is the completion of this cycle of new remedies which Bach is going to discover. He found wild oat in the summer of 1934, and through that winter, going into 1935, Nora tells us he was beginning to be unsettled and agitated and began to see that he was going to discover a new set of remedies, something else, something different. He's had the 12 healers, the type remedies. He's had the 7 helpers, which are for chronic conditions. He's rounded it off with wild oat, which is the direction finder. If you don't know where you are or who you are, this will lead you back to yourself. And he's made them all with the sun method. And then in 1935, he begins the process anew. In late February or March, one of the very first plants to flower, or trees to flower, is cherry plum. This is Prunus cerasifera, it's the wild cherry. And it's a brilliant white flower that sort of blazes with light in the early year. Now, Bach, we haven't talked very much about his personal life experience, but he said that he was always in pain. He attributed that to his impatiens nature, and that's why he links impatiens with tension and pain. But the way that this is described by Nora, this was a period or time of acute inflammation of his sinuses, and it drove him almost to distraction with the intensity of the pain and the discomfort. And when he went out and saw the cherry plum in flower, he recognized, by the same sort of process of sympathetic resonance, he recognized that this was going to be a new remedy which would be for people who feel that they are losing control and mental control. They fear that they may do something dreadful. Often we think about it as a sort of a remedy for that sense of incipient madness or of suicide. It's a very, very intense and a very unpleasant experience. Around the same time, also in flower, we see elm and aspen. Now, elm, he says, is the remedy for people who feel overwhelmed by responsibility and they become depressed because they think that the task that they have set themselves is too great for one person to manage. Hey, wait a minute, this sounds just like Dr. Bach. He thinks he's completed his work, and suddenly the whole thing opens up again, and he's overwhelmed by the responsibility and becomes depressed because he feels that he's not got the strength to carry on what he needs to do. And it's as though he suddenly opens before him, he suddenly sees in front of him what he's going to have to do, which is to go through a sequence very rapidly and very intensely, a sequence of intense emotional experiences which will lead to the discovery of 19 new remedies. So between February and July in 1935, he discovers 19 remedies. Well, that's about one a week. It's a very intense period of discovery, but also an intense period of personal experience. I can show you the other ones in the list, but that's not the most important thing here. What I'd like to point to is that Bach says that, let's go back, Bach says, these remedies are made not by the sunshine method, but by the boiling method. So he's going to prepare these new remedies using a different method of preparation. For a long time it seemed that this was a conundrum. How could one explain why he uses a different method of preparation? The sun method seems so nice, it's such an attractive idea, this sort of the gentle light of the sun shining through the flowers, it's very lyrical, very pleasant. And when you put these flowers into a saucepan and apply heat, that seems to be, it's counterintuitive. But there's a reason behind this, as always, and if we use investigative logic, we can think why he may have changed his approach to the preparation of the essences. What actually does it entail? We take a saucepan, I use a white enamel saucepan, but a saucepan, and 2/3 fill it with the twigs and material of the flowering plants or trees or whatever they are, and then put in 2 pints of, again, fresh spring water, and beneath it we light a fire. Now I use a gas fire, and we boil it with the lid off for about 30 minutes. Now the interesting thing is, if you remember back with the bowl and the sun method, here the sun, the radiant energy of the sun is falling upon the bowl. Here the energy of the fire gain the element of fire, but the element of fire comes from beneath the saucepan and is forcing the elements up, where here the air is expressed out of the water, here the water is expressed out into the air, because we all know steam rises and this bubbles, and there's an agitation in the, it's called phase transition, or phase change between a liquid and a gas. So again we've got this process of the elements, earth, water, air and fire, where here the energy is descending, in this case it's ascending. Now I think this tells us something very interesting, particularly when coupled or put in connection with the type of remedy that he's discovering. Because each of these 19 new remedies describes an emotional state which is a reaction to a traumatic event. Let's go back to me when I'm wandering along, crossing the road, and a car is coming, and, well, it doesn't matter whether I go under the wheels of the car or simply actually nearly get hit by the car, whether it makes physical contact or not, I'm actually going to be very shocked and surprised. I'm going to be jumped out of my skin with fright. Now, we know that those sort of things actually have an effect, both on the mind and the patterning of the mind, but also physically. When we have a big surprise and shock like that, adrenaline pumps through our body because we're ready for fight and flight and for all the kind of reactions to that event, which are very, very primal and basic, and the autonomic nervous system takes over and gets us ready to do what we need to do in order to save our life. And these remedies are in many respects connected with sort of life-saving circumstances. That was a physical accident, but supposing the trauma is longer, deeper, more involved, maybe it's a psychological trauma, not a physical one. How might we react to it? I have to be careful here, because the moment you start to look into these things, we're evoking a pattern of response in ourselves, in even the description of the event. But each of us knows that at many different times in our lives we've experienced difficult and traumatic things. It could be very personal intrusion or disruption of my safety and well-being as an individual. It could be something quite trivial. As a child, let's say, I fall off my bike when I'm learning to ride, and as a result of that, I lose confidence. I used to be very sure of who I was and what I could do, but I'm not going to try it anymore because it was hurtful and it was painful. I was told that I would be quite safe. My daddy told me I'd be okay, but I wasn't. Now I don't trust daddy anymore, sort of thing. That sounds silly, it sounds trivial, but one of the 19 remedies is larch. What does Bach say larch is for? He says it's for people who have lost confidence, who no longer feel that they can trust themselves in a situation. For those who do not consider themselves as good or capable as those around them, who expect failure, who feel they will never be a success and so do not venture to make a strong enough attempt to succeed. That's an emotional response to a traumatic event. That isn't something that's inherent in the character of an individual. It's something that actually is the result of an emotional response to something that happened to them. Because not that we are all confident, but we don't get unconfident, we don't lack confidence until some instruction is written into us. Information comes in that we say, I'm not going to do that anymore. The same is true of, let's say, depression. Depression is not a germ that comes along, suddenly comes in through my ear. Oh God, I really do feel depressed. Depression is a reaction to something that's happened. Maybe repeated failure, maybe a sense of being worthless. It doesn't matter. Something happens that gives me that impression, that gives me that story. Let's say with pine, which Bach describes as a remedy for guilt. You don't feel guilty just out of the blue. You don't wake up one morning and feel guilty. You feel guilty because something has instructed you into that frame of thinking. So these remedies have a different quality and they're prepared in a different way. And I would suggest that there's something quite specific about the element of fire which is used to make them. I'm going to draw not a circle but an egg. Fairly good egg. If we think that at the top there is the sun with its radiant light, and it doesn't matter what this cycle represents. It could be a seed from a flower which comes down to earth. It could be a human soul that incarnates into a physical body on earth. But we could be certain that if we look at it in terms of energy, the energy of the sun comes down into the earth, and here it's a plant form or a tree or whatever. And when this goes within the earth, if it's a carbon form like a tree, the possibility is there for metamorphosis, that it changes state. It's still carbon, but it's carbon in a different form. And that's the carbon that we use to make a fire. Whether it's a bonfire of sticks, whether it's actually comes from oil or gas, it's still this energy from the sun has been taken down within the earth, and there it becomes transformed. Now, if this is a picture of a soul, an individual incarnating, here we come with the 12 healers, and the lessons, the great lessons of life, which we take with us into the world. And here we have the return journey. Because remember that Bach sees these, and I would say I see these remedies, as being about the evolution of consciousness. So the development of new aptitudes, learning the lessons of life, that's part of the process of return. And this is where the second 19 are becoming very, very relevant and most significant, because if you fall through life, you know those kids at school who, you know, they were always good at sport, they were good looking, they always got the girls, they were the prefects, they went to university, everything was fine, they had a family, you know, 2.4 children in the family, and daddy had a nice car, and mummy went to lunch with friends, and everything was great. And nothing seemed to go wrong for them. And you thought, oh, I just wish I could be like that. But it's not really true, because if nothing goes wrong for you in your life, you have no opportunity to learn. You may learn mentally, you may learn facts and material, but in terms of learning about life, you learn nothing, because it's only the resistance, the friction, the heat that comes, the fire that comes from the difficulty of the process of living that enables us to change. And change and evolution go hand in hand, because without change there is no evolution. So for me, poor though it is, this diagram represents something of the cycle of birth, life and death, of descending souls with a lesson to learn on earth, as Bach would say, and remembering, again in Bach's terms, our divine origin, which comes from the sun, which comes to the light, and our need to return to the light. Because when we walk in darkness, we cannot actually see our way. That is the riddle of nature, but again, it's so clear and so succinct. The last of the second 19 was a remedy which is probably the deepest and most potent of all the 38 remedies, flower essences, is sweet chestnut, which Bach says is for people who are experiencing such a darkening of the light that they believe that there is no hope, there is no possibility of making this return journey. They become so stuck in the earth element that they cannot imagine the return to the light. Let me see if I can find his description, because it's very, very nice. For those moments which happen to some people when the anguish is so great as to seem to be unbearable, when the mind or body feels as if it had borne to the uttermost limits of its endurance, and that now it must give way, when it seems there is nothing but destruction and annihilation left to face. Well, that's very different to any of the other remedies from the 12 or the 7, from the 7 helpers. And I think this is actually uniquely Bach's contribution, which is the sense that there is a much deeper purpose and underlying philosophy to these treatments than simply take a pill and forget the headache. It's about an opportunity for learning and understanding and deepening our awareness, being able to see and observe not just the outer world and how we may profit by it, but the inner world, that which I can observe within me, that enables me not to be a better person, not to be good, but to understand. Because if I don't understand my life, if I don't know why I am here, I must be lost. Because Bach's description is of a roadmap. It's like a map of the psychological world, yes, but it's a roadmap for life. We hope that not everybody has to go through each of these experiences, that, you know, it would be much nicer not to suffer sweet chestnut. But when you actually check with people, if you are willing to open yourself and see, you know that there are times of despair. What enables you to get up and go again is the idea that hope does spring eternal in the human breast, that we may find a better prospect for tomorrow, which is why we're still here. But for some people, that downward path has no return. And I think it's a great passion for Bach that he should find a remedy which would help such a person to take the first steps in the journey back towards the light, towards self-fulfillment and self-knowledge and self-realization.